So, this is the story of how Kaylee and I completed a 4-day canoe trip.
So good at it. We actually got the 4 days done in 1 day.
Yeah, we're that good. I've been waiting to do a multi-day canoe trip for years. And of course, rather than just take it slow and do a couple of day trips, the best way to do anything is to dive in up to your neck and make it really hard to get out faster.
We're gonna portage from lake to lake, have a good time, do some fishing.
Very adamant we were going to leave first thing Thursday morning. It was going to be great. So I got home and I had a ton of work that I was supposed to be finishing before we left, but very little of it got done. Just as I was about to sit down and work through it, it was kind of around 2 a.m. or so, I heard my roommate's dog just come unglued. She was barking uncontrollably. So I came upstairs and discovered that she had woken her owner up, my roommate Kim, and Kim was kind of giving her a hard time for barking so loudly. But she hadn't noticed that the front door was A, unlocked, and B, just outside of it, there was a gentleman standing there looking very out of it. He tried to get in a couple of times. He tried to leave our yard and was unable to because he couldn't. He was so confused that he couldn't open the gate even. It probably took about 45 minutes to an hour to have that situation resolved. We called 211. They swung by. He ended up taking off down the street before they got here. So I think they met up with him, but neither Kim nor I wanted to go to sleep while this was going on because it was pretty uncomfortable, right? The adrenaline rush from that, starting at 2:30, kept me up until 4:30 in the morning. So that was not fun. So I sent a message to Kaylee being like, hey, I'm going to sleep in a little bit and I'll tell you what happened in the morning. So the next morning I slept in quite a bit and spent about 45 minutes explaining what had happened to Kaylee and getting her kind of up to speed on that. So then we probably took about an hour and a half prepping all of the camping stuff that I hadn't been able to prep the night before.
So we load up the canoe on the car and it's about 2 p.m. at this point. So already we're losing a ton of morning to this.
And head out to get groceries. Of course, we grabbed a bunch of groceries. It was great.
Spend probably too much money on food, but whatever. Like to have a little bit of creature comfort out there.
And as we came outside, we unloaded all of the gear into the vehicle and Kaylee came around the back and...
First thing I do is whack my head on the friggin' canoe. Super hard. I still have the bruise from it. I think it's even a goose egg. That's the first cry of the weekend, I think. Not the last.
Kind of not a great omen to start the whole trip, but, we thought nothing of it. Jumped in and took off.
So the drive is long. It's about 3 hours north of here.
It just happened to be a very windy day, so we were fighting with that a little bit.
The wind is just pushing us all over the highway.
Definitely made for a long trip. Luckily, we had the canoe strapped down fairly securely.
So we get there, and it's just black flies everywhere. So many black flies. It's bad. It's so bad. You guys, it's so bad.
They've got these really cool aluminum carts with bike wheels on them. You just throw your canoe on it, strap it onto that.
It's basically raining black flies at this point. We're just breathing them in, going up our noses, into our ears, and there's no carts around. So we got to figure out where the carts are. And there are these big metal poles in the way. Luckily, it just barely managed to fit over top. It's like they planned it or something.
We load everything up, and just as we're about to finish, it starts to rain.
It's not heavy at first. Luckily, though, it makes the black flies leave us alone a little bit. Except wearing a hat. They like to, I had about a dozen just sitting right on the brim, getting out of the rain. So every couple of seconds is just a little puff of like...
And of course I had my camera gear out, so it was coming down hard enough that I was definitely worrying about my camera stuff. So rather than film much, I threw the GoPro on the canoe and got a few shots from that, but otherwise the camera stayed in the waterproof bag. And
so we get everything carted up and ready to go. Make our way back. We hit one of the poles. Not a big deal. Just a little bit of a ding.
3 kilometers of mud and rain and muskeg.
This is swamp, but this was swamp.
It was kind of a cool trail in that it went in and out between poplars and aspen and spruce. And so you at least got a little bit of variety.
Like, it was 2 steps from being washed out, kind of swampy. Oh my god, the puddles. So first couple, I kind of tried to avoid the mud, but after the 3rd or 4th, like, right across the path, it's just why even bother. Toes are swimming, feet are stinking, covered in swamp water, trundling along in the rain, covered in flies. This was the start of our weekend.
An hour later, we finally show up at the dock, and they have this wonderful boardwalk from back in the trees all the way out. I think it was probably 200 to 300 feet of boardwalk just to get out to the edge of the reeds so that you could actually use the dock.
There's one thing worse than flies, it's mosquitoes. And this was about the time that the rain stopped. So there's nothing stopping them. So we bust out the bug dope and we empty about half the can just to keep us safe. So you get up to the end of the dock and you're looking in the water and it's just muddy and ugly and you can see all these weeds growing up. It's not quite what I was imagining.
We toss the canoe in. I run the cart back. Next up, Kaylee is the first one in the boat.
This is a little wobbly.
And the reason why she's the first one in is because that way, if I get in first, she doesn't have to worry about holding the canoe while climbing on board.
Wobblier than I thought. Is it supposed to be this wobbly?
I can hold it while she's on board and then I can hop in. And I'm pretty familiar with boats. I haven't done a lot of canoeing, but I'm familiar enough with boats that I'm pretty comfortable with that. So she hops in.
I'm feeling like this is really wobbly.
And then I climb in, and as soon as I climb in, the first thing I hear is, oh, and I know she's a little uncomfortable.
Every little movement is just setting off my danger button.
So we take a few minutes to try and
It feels like the boat doesn't want to stand up.
Get her to know the motions of the canoe and the feeling of it.
It feels like the canoe is trying to get rid of us.
That can go one of 2 ways. Either she can loosen up and get comfortable with it, enjoy it, or she can get more and more uncomfortable as time goes on. Well, initially, she got pretty comfortable.
It was bad. It was so bad.
We spent about an hour.
Yeah, so we paddle.
And we paddled.
And we paddle.
And we paddled.
And we paddle. And then there was some paddling.
And we paddled.
And then we paddled.
I had downloaded the up-to-date provincial park map on my phone.
About an hour in, we realized that we managed to get lost on a lake.
But, like a total goober, I was like, oh, it's probably the same one as they have up here, so I won't even bother looking at it. And I didn't.
I'm gonna count that as an accomplishment.
And because of that, we swung west, thinking that there was a campsite there.
Personally, going to just pin that on my wall. Got lost on a lake.
About 15 minutes in, when we were a little bit past where I thought the campsite should be, Kaylee starts to really kind of hit her limit.
We were looking for that campsite for a good 20 minutes. The sun's setting. Getting tired because of all the paddling. Did I mention there was paddling? Because there was paddling. Finally, I hit my limit. I'm like, Katie, I can't do this anymore. Katie, please.
She's like, oh, I don't know if I can keep going on. Are we there? Like, close? Like, what's happening?
Katie. Katie, I'm begging you. And she's like, okay, calm your tits.
So I'm like, okay, let's just go around this little bend, this point, and see if there's anything on the other side of that. And if not, we'll turn around. There was nothing on the other side of that. So we turned around. And I pulled out my camera and threw the longer telephoto lens on it. And
she starts looking around the lake. And she finds a relatively close campsite.
And I thought I had seen a spot that might be a campsite on the far shore. And sure enough, there it was. So we made a beeline for that. And I could see the little sign on there that had a little tent symbol. And I was like, either this is going to be the campsite, a perfect campsite, or it's going to have a little tent symbol, but then when we get close, it's going to have a red circle in a line through it.
So we paddle, and we keep paddling.
I did not tell Kaylee that this was what I was worrying about because I didn't want to add to her anxiety. And honestly, that area is nice enough that we probably could have pitched a tent just about anywhere and been fine.
We finally beach up on this campsite. It's about almost 9 o'clock now.
As we hit the shore, up on shore, I see that there are a couple of tents there, but it looks like there's still some space. It looks like there's some guys, some youngish guys looking kind of dude bro-ish.
We get camp set up, and the wind's howling, and dude bros are chugging beers, probably about 50 feet away.
We spent a few minutes setting up the tent, and had some hot dogs, and crawled basically straight into bed. It was a glorious sunset. The sky was just, it was beautiful. And the lake was perfectly calm, too. I took a time lapse, so I'll probably put it in here somewhere. So I crawled into bed, and after packing everything up for the night, and almost as soon as I hit the pillow, it starts to rain.
This is our first night. Sandwiched rain on each side.
Now, the whole portage in had rained, and the whole paddle had been rain-free. And I was like, oh, well, apparently this weekend is just going to rain on us when we're on land. Okay, that's weird, but whatever.
Just miserable.
So we tried to fall asleep. And I can sleep through just about anything.
So we're in the tent, and I'm like, Katie, please, I don't think I could do this again. Please, Katie, I'm begging you.
But my feet were soaked from the hike. It was cold.
And Katie's like, no, I'm not deciding anything tonight. There's one thing more miserable than mosquitoes. It's not having enough blankets on a cold night.
And we had packed for what was forecasted to be like highs of mid 20 degrees Celsius and lows of low teens. And we had already, like, the high for that day when we had gotten there was about 16.
We had a flimsy little one person sleeping bag for 2 people.
The low, I'm going to guess, was probably 8 or 9 degrees. So it got pretty chilly that night relative to what we'd been expecting. Plus, we were in the perfect storm because, well, our feet were all wet, right? There was a lot of tossing and turning that night. We ended up sleeping underneath the extra blanket that I had brought for padding. And
we had a little picnic blanket that was supposed to go beneath us for the night, but it got so cold that I ended up crawling under that too and just kind of shivered a lot. It was not fun. I got maybe an hour of sleep total.
I think I got a few hours of sleep. Kaylee, she's a really light sleeper. She didn't sleep very well.
And so the sun comes up. It's still raining off and on.
The next morning, we woke up and it was still cold and rainy. The sun had come out a little bit, but it was still pretty chilly.
I just sit there and listen to the dude bros in the corner. They're having breakfast. They're, I don't know, talking about sport ball. I wasn't really paying that much attention. I was kind of focusing on how it's raining and how I needed to pee.
And the rain really didn't give up fully until around 11 in the morning. We were both feeling pretty miserable at this point.
Just sitting and waiting in the tent, waiting for time to pass.
So we decided let's have some breakfast and decide what we're going to do with the day. Kind of go from there.
So we have our oatmeal and we're just kind of laying. I had way too much water in mine. It was like oat soup. Actually pretty fitting for the camping trip so far.
We decided that rather than continue on the circuit, we would just spend the day around that particular lake. There were supposed to be 4 different lakes. Our original plan had been to do all 4 of these lakes in 4 days, and it was going to be great. But because of the day before had been so exhausting, and because the weather had been so terrible, we decided let's just take it easy.
I was pretty adamant about not being able to do the whole trip. But I didn't want to take the camping trip away from Katie because that would have just been rude. We're going to spend the day fishing. We're going to catch some fish. We're get a big pike in the boat.
So we loaded up the fishing gear, hopped in the boat.
We only had a tiny little frying pan, so I don't know what really would have happened if we had caught a pike.
And almost immediately I could tell that something was wrong.
I'm starting to get a little trepidatious about this. I don't know if that's a word, but that's what I was feeling.
The lake was a lot more rough than it had been the night before. There was a lot more wind.
We get the life jackets on. I'm all seated. Boat's kind of rocking a little bit. The wind's starting to pick up.
So we were seeing more waves. And to someone who's not comfortable on a canoe in general, that can be pretty disconcerting.
We get about 20 feet away from the beach. The water's starting to slap a little bit.
Kaylee had kind of ended up in a full-on panic attack. She was really not okay on the water that day.
Panic starts to kick in because it turns out that this wobbly feeling that I was feeling last night was actually probably like a legitimate phobia.
We paused for a second. I put us bow to the waves and just to chat with her for a couple of minutes. I said, what would you like to do? We can go in. I would really like to do some fishing. So if you're comfortable with it, we'll bring you into shore.
So I start panicking. I start crying. I start praying. And I'm like, Katie, please. Katie, I can't do this. Katie, I'm begging you.
You can take some downtime. I'll do some fishing. And then we can talk about what we want to do with the rest of the trip. And she was pretty on board with that.
She's like, ugh. Fine. Pulls me back into shore. And she's like, okay, you do your crying. You eat some eggs. They're good eggs.
I didn't say any of this!
So she's like, I'm gonna go do some fishing. Cause I've really been looking forward to this weekend. And we'll talk about this later. Super serious face. Talk about it later.
Liar.
Best part of a story is embellishing. The fish is never just this big. She took about 20 minutes to get out past the reeds. Finally got set up.
Waves and a 15-foot canoe and one person are just not a good mix, especially when that person isn't a very experienced paddler. I made it outside of the reeds. I made it out to a deadhead that we had passed the day before, and I made a cast. And by the time I had reeled that cast in, I had probably floated 20 yards. So I fixed myself up again, paddled out further from shore, and tried to make another cast attempt. Did not stick. So at that point I just gave up. I said, it's not worth it. It's just really rubbing salt in the wound at this point, so I'm going to go back into shore.
the canoe is just like a big sail, basically. 1 pound of Katie is 10 pounds of wind.
I was pretty disappointed. I've put a lot of weight onto this trip. I've put a lot of time into planning it, and this is the first time I've gotten out of the city, really, for months. So at this point, I'm starting to realize, like, this trip is not... It's just not going to be what I want it to be.
So we're kind of sitting there mulling our options, realizing that this camping trip has kind of gone to shit.
So rather than get too bothered by it, the plan was simple. Have some hot dogs and just try to relax a little bit and see where Kaylee's at.
Getting over the evening, getting over the morning. Kind of want something a little sweet, so I pull out the bag of marshmallows and bam! Teeth marks. Teeth marks everywhere. So I'm like, jeez. Oh no. Katie, please. Katie, fix this. Mice have gotten into our food bags. They've probably damaged about half of the food that we have. They got into the salty chips. They got into the marshmallows. Right away, I'm just like, no, I'm not gonna touch this. And Katie doesn't care. Katie's like, I'll just fucking eat around it. It'll be fine. Salty chips. Yum.
We had some food and cuddled and chatted and kind of talked about what we'd like to do.
Because half of camping is cuddling. We sit down. It was very enjoyable. I start nerding out about Star Trek, talking about whether or not there are like carport ferries in Star Trek. Very important.
We were kind of leaning towards the possibility of just kind of hanging out in that area for another night and just camping there, and then maybe heading back on the Saturday.
Katie decides, maybe we should have a nap. But first, I gotta go pee.
But we hadn't really decided anything. And we were starting to kind of drift off to sleep. Both of us, I'm pretty sure. I know I was. Little miss nap all the time over here. But I was like, no, I gotta go to the bathroom and I gotta clean up after lunch. Because I had kind of left some of the stuff out, not all of it.
She goes off to the outhouse. And I'm kind of, just kind of making my way out. Maybe I'll use the washroom after her.
And make my way back over to the picnic table, and I'm packing stuff up.
I just barely get out of the tent.
Mostly camera stuff at this point because I want to make sure that it gets out of the rain in case we get more rain, and I want to make sure the food's all put away and everything because bear safety is important. And I hear Kaylee getting out of the tent, and I look up. And when I look up, I see something out of the corner of my eye. I look over at it. I look back at Kaylee.
So I hear from behind me, Kaylee? Kaylee?
That's a bear. And there's a juvenile black bear.
So I look around, and there's this scrawny little black bear trying to get into our food bin. Looks pretty young.
Maybe young enough to have a mom around.
A little cherry on the sundae.
And he's looking at me.
Katie starts giving instructions. Go find the knife.
And so that's the point where I call Kaylee over. And I say, can you look in this bag and see if you can find our big Bowie knife? I'm going to see if I can scare off the bear. Start calling out to it.
It takes me forever to find the knife, and I end up dumping the whole bag out, finding the bear spray and just throwing it at her.
Kaylee first found the bear spray, which is funny. Something I always carry, but I always also forget that I have with me.
I end up finding the knife.
As I'm walking a little closer to the bear as it goes into the bush, I don't want to lose eye contact with it. I want to make sure I know where the bear is so that if it circles around, if it turns out that it is aggressive in any way, that I know where it's coming from. Luckily, this bear was very just curious, and
eventually he kind of meanders off. We're just kind of, our nap has now been ruined. This is about the third thing now that has been displaced in our trip. Now is the time to talk about permanent things.
So once it was gone, and completely gone, it took probably about 5-10 minutes, we both looked at each other and said, okay, now let's make a plan. What are we doing?
So we sit down, and Katie's saying, okay, so here are our options.
And at this point, I think there was no question in my eyes that we were going to have to leave, because with all of the anxiety that Kaylee had been feeling, there's no coming back from a bear after you've discovered a phobia and you've viewed yourself as disappointing your partner, and you've had a cold, wet night where you barely slept, and all these things have happened.
We can leave by canoe, or we can leave by trail.
For a total of 15 kilometers. Keep in mind that this is now about probably 2 in the afternoon.
There's a trail that links this particular campsite back to the launching area.
And I gave her the option because I could go either way.
We grabbed the food, we grabbed the cameras, basically anything that any sort of creature is going to want to take. Start up the path. First thing I notice, several piles of bear poop. So this is like a regular place for bears. You know, no big deal, just bears.
Not 50 meters up the trail, what do we find? But
5 trees across the path.
A whole bunch of deadfall that's covering the trail, and it's in the middle of a massive mud bog.
No way in hell are we getting a canoe cart down this way.
There's no way that we can pass even that first single obstacle, let alone the rest of the obstacles that we don't even know may or may not be on the trail.
So that path is out, which leaves one option. We gotta wobble. We gotta go to the lake and we gotta wobble our way back.
With kind of a resigned look at each other, we headed back to the canoe, hopped in, and started paddling.
And the way we gotta go is completely parallel with the waves.
So the only way that we could navigate that without ending up causing more panic attacks and more stress would be to kind of zigzag across them, right?
So if we head straight there, canoe's gonna be tipped over and we're gonna lose a lot of stuff. This is a little bit beyond my brain to comprehend at this point, because I am just panicking like a gazelle.
Of course, that added more time, and it added more paddling distance.
I am just panicking like a deer.
My poor stressed out girlfriend was a little confused, but we made it through.
My brain just sees that we're heading away from where we need to go. Why is that? Why are we heading away? Katie, why? Katie, please. Katie, I'm begging you. And so she's like, calm your tits. I got this.
Eventually we made it into the bay.
She got this.
And made our way back up the bay.
So overall, this trip takes about an hour, maybe longer, maybe less. And my anxiety is just barely below threshold. Specifically in the bay. Before the bay, I was gone. I was not able to keep myself together. I could paddle, and that's about it. But in the bay, I was able to at least be a person. Not really relax, but kind of notice the things. It's pretty. It's terrifying, but it's pretty.
Back up to the dock.
Katie goes and gets a cart, and I'm kind of just like holding the leash, making sure the boat doesn't run away.
We reloaded onto the cart at the dock.
I'm getting swarmed by bugs.
And we headed back on a 3-kilometer portage back through muddy, mosquito-infested trails.
None of the mud has gone anywhere. Our socks and shoes are already soaked. I had green shoes before this. They are not green anymore. We make it back to the vehicle fairly safely. Get everything loaded up. Get ready to go.
Back to the car and our 3-hour drive home.
It has been a little over 24 hours since we got there. Make it home, safe and sound, unload everything into the garage because we are the walking dead at this point. There is no sense in trying to sort things out. Roommates are like, what are you doing home? And we're like, that's a story.
So in that 24-hour period, we experienced
More rain than I have experienced in the past 2 years.
mosquitoes beyond description,
More flies than I care to count.
mud,
20 mosquitoes dead by my hand.
sunburns,
A new phobia.
the discovery of phobias.
The theft of our food.
We experienced bears.
And a bear. Top it all off, stub my toe on the bed as I'm going to bed. So that's the story of our 4-day canoe trip that we ended in 20 hours. So that's the story of the canoe trip that lasted 25 hours. So that's the story of the 4-day canoe trip that we completed in 24 hours.
So that's the story of how we're so good at canoeing that we did a 4-day circuit in a single day.